Hi, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to the Graduate School of Architecture Practice Lecture Series. This cold evening, hopefully we'll have some warmth brought to us by our guest, Lerato Bereng, who's joining us from her gallery in Parktown North. I'd like to welcome you all. And as you know, the Graduate School of Architecture for the last few years, we've hosted what we refer to as the Practice Lecture Series. And before I introduce Lerato, I just want to talk through that series and what we're trying to do with it. So the thinking behind the Practice Lecture Series is to invite not only architects, we're an architecture school, but we look at creative practitioners. And we like to invite creative practitioners whose work in whatever way may or may not intersect with architectural practice, but who are in the cultural landscape of Johannesburg and South Africa, sometimes international practitioners. And we invite the practitioners in to share with us what they do and what they produce, but more importantly, how they do it and how they have arrived at doing that, how they have come to be what they are and to occupy the space that they occupy. And I think we've had a really fascinating range of presenters over the years, and hoping to continue that this year with the series that we've had so far. Next week, as part of the next lecture will be on the 22nd of July, after our mid-year break, Français, who is an architect and also conductor and musician, somebody that studied architecture that's now studying music. So that promises to be a really fascinating presentation. And Professor Emmanuel Kambula is going to be introducing the practice lecture series moving forward. As many of you know, I will be leaving my position. I'm sad to leave, but time to move on and do other things. So this will be the last practice lecture that I'm presenting as director of the GSA. So I'd like to introduce this evening's speaker, Lerato Bereng, who's a friend of mine and somebody that I met since arriving in South Africa, and who I think works in wonderful ways in her own domain. And I thought it would be really fascinating to hear her speak about her work. She is a curator and also a director of the Stevenson Gallery in Johannesburg. And the relationship, I think, between the curation that she does and architectural practice is interesting. A number of architects who are coming out of this school, teachers and practitioners, are moving in a curatorial space, exercising and deploying their architectural knowledge within a space that conventionally, traditionally might have been seen as exclusively an art space. So this intersection about the curation of knowledge, the curation within a discipline, and in a way the curation of architecture, I think is an interesting topical subject. We also speak in our discipline of archiving as well as curation. So I think it would be really valuable for us to have somebody that's working in that space speak about their practice. So I'm going to introduce Lerato. But before I do, just to share with you that this is a CPD event for those of you who are practicing architects and need to get CPD points. And in the chat at the end of the talk, you will be able to get the link that will allow you to register for the CPD points for those of you who would like to do that. And if during the course of the talk you have any thoughts or comments or reactions to what Lerato is sharing, please post them in the chat, because at the end we're going to be able to have a conversation with Lerato. We're going to be able to ask questions, share our reflections on what she has presented to us. So that's always can often be a really sort of interesting part of the evening, the opportunity to interact with her and to ask her questions, the speaker, to find out or to clarify anything or to share what you've enjoyed about the presentation. So the CPD will be posted at the end, and you'll be able to sign up for that and also ask questions. So I'm going to introduce Lerato now. Lerato Bereng is from Lesotho. She's born in Maseru and she lives and works in Johannesburg. She's a director and partner of the illustrious Stevenson Gallery, Johannesburg, Cape Town and Amsterdam. She holds a Bachelor of Fine Art and a Master's of Fine Art, majoring in curating from Rhodes University, Makhanda. And her curated projects include Conversations at Morija, Maeder House, Morija, Lesotho, 2017, 2015, 2013, Sex, the Stevenson Johannesburg, 2016, Simon Gush, 9 o'clock, the National Arts Festival Makhanda in 2015, Out of Thin Air, Cape Town in 2012, and featuring Simplicity as an Irrational Fear, Cape Town 2010. From 2008 to 2009, Lerato took part in Cape Africa Platform's Young Curators program, for which she curated Thank You Driver as part of the Cape 2009 Biennale. And in 2021, she curated How to Make a Country at FRAC in Poitou-Charentes in France, under the umbrella of the Insitut Français Africa official 2020 season. So as you can see, she has quite a prolific pedigree as a curator and deep experience with some really intriguing titles to the work that she has curated. And I'm sure you're as excited as I am to hear her presentation to us this evening.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you to Mark and the Graduate School of Architecture for having me. It's just such an honor to be presenting in a kind of institution that I have such respect for. It's recent, relatively recent, that I have, through Mark, been kind of engaging with GSA, and I hope to engage more. So this is really an honor to do. Please bear with me. I'm just going to share my screen and let's hope we do it smoothly. Okay. So here we go. Oh, just a sec. Yes, there we go. Okay. I'm going to make it large so you can see it all. So I've titled my presentation today On Space and Placing Things. You know, I shied away from using the term curating, even though, you know, a lot of my bio, which Mark has shared, was kind of curatorial. And yes, of course, I kind of consider myself one. However, it is an interesting kind of hat that I wear, a double hat, in that I am in a commercial gallery, and so one seldom imagines curating as something that you're able to do within a commercial realm. It's more so seen as kind of more institutional and outside of commerce. But you'll see through what I share that those two things have often intersected. So without further ado, so I thought to start where I always start with every curatorial project of mine. It always begins at home. As Mark mentioned, I am from Lesotho. I was born there. It is the place where I kind of source all of my inspiration, really, and where I learned everything I know, and I continue to go back to remind myself and learn more. So in many of my curatorial projects, Lesotho has been there in some way or another, and you'll see that soon. This photograph that I'm sharing was taken earlier this year in a village called Lerato Bereng, which is my grandfather's village, a village that my grandfather established in Tabatseka, in Mashai, Tabatseka in Lesotho. Very remote area of Lesotho, very high up in the mountains. I can't tell you how many mountains we climbed to get here. The mud you see is where we ended up spending the night because the car wouldn't move forward. So yonder, that tiny little dot, is my father, and I followed his footsteps shortly thereafter. So that was a real treat. So it kind of just a reminder of where I'm from and where it all comes from. So my grandfather plays this really important role in my understanding of self, but also I think the kind of creative, I suppose, gene that I may have inherited. A couple of years ago, and not you know, I haven't always known this, my father shared that my grandfather had written the first book of Sesotho poetry ever published, called which is the little booklet that you see here. It was published at Morija Sesotho Book Depot, and this is his name, DCT Bereng. I never met my grandfather, so I only meet him through his words, which is quite a wonderful way to experience somebody, but also somewhat incomprehensible for those of us who kind of came later and know a simpler Sesotho. Anyway, so this book becomes an important thread in the most recent exhibition that I curated at FRAC Poitou-Charentes, and you will see why. So the exhibition, I was invited to curate an exhibition called How to Make a Country. How to Make a Country was a part of the umbrella, or under the umbrella of the Africa 2020 season, which is this kind of program that France does where they choose a region to focus on, and then all the museums across the country are programmed in relation to that theme. They had chosen the continent of Africa in 2020. Of course, it then couldn't happen because of COVID, and then it kind of happened from 2021 onwards. And so my exhibition, which was conceived of for 2020, ended up happening in 2021. It happened at FRAC Poitou-Charentes in the southwest of France, in a small town called Angoulême. So having been invited to think about an exhibition under this kind of national umbrella, and also thinking about the complexity of, France having an Africa season, thinking of the kind of colonial relationship, it immediately struck me that I should look at where, the kind of historical relationship between France and Lesotho. Something that I had been exploring previously, and something that interested me. Along my kind of research, it emerged that France, some of the first printing press in Lesotho was established by French missionaries, so were the first schools, and so was this kind of area called Morija, which is a space that I source plenty of inspiration from and I go to quite often. You'll see it a little bit later in the presentation. So thinking about it, I tried to understand this idea of independence and what independence means and these kind of national influences and that relationship. I also found out that Sesotho, the language, was first orthographed by French missionaries. So I looked up this idea of countries, how to make a country. And I came across many things, but one of the funny things I found was how to make a country in 4 easy steps. It was a kind of wiki how, and it was an entertaining kind of moment, but it did break down the very core principles of making a country. And I kind of extracted from that what I thought was interesting. It kind of spoke about four things: land, language. One must have land, one must establish a language, one must have a population, and one must have laws. And so I started unpacking these ideas of land, language, laws, and population, and the kind of laws became kind of indicative of a certain kind of ideology, thinking about how the law is often premised on religion and Christianity in particular, and thinking about this particular relationship in Lesotho being pertinent because of the missionaries. I looked at artists that were working with these ideas within their practices already and invited them to either create new works or loaned existing works that were already kind of in dialogue with these ideas. And so this is a show that was really important to me because for many reasons, because I was able to really explore this relationship. I was able to focus on Lesotho in this significant way, but then I was also able to publish a publication, my very first. So that's quite important to me. Thinking about space, I was in Angoulême. I had to imagine this particular museum, the actual architecture and the site, and think how to present this idea. Dineo Bopape came up with this project called Setlhare ke Pelo. Dineo Bopape is a South African artist. She was looking at kind of medicine man and a traditional healer and traveler and advisor to the first king of Lesotho, the founder of the Basotho nation, Moshoeshoe I. The name of this healer, why am I blanking on his name? I will remember it now, sorry. But this traditional, Mokhomi, that's his name. This traditional healer was asked by Moshoeshoe when Moshoeshoe was forming the nation, you know, as his council asked, what medicine would you give me to create a country, to make a country? How do I give me the herbs? And Mokhomi said to have responded, there is no medicine. The medicine is the heart. Setlhare ke pelo is what it means. And so this becomes the first kind of introduction to the exhibition with this flag that Dineo did and the project that happens inside. But this really relates a lot to the physical structure, this kind of announcement. It has such nationalistic kind of ideas, you know, a flag that indicates where you are, or kind of claiming of land and territory, but then also related to this kind of logo of FRAC Poitou-Charentes, which I thought was quite interesting. Then I had to think about the actual exhibition space and how one would enter it. So you'd walk through the glass doors and then you'd enter this room, which is the first kind of enclosed space. Usually it's lit, you'd hang a kind of introductory artwork here or vinyl or something like that. I decided to make it dark and project this artwork by Frida Orupabo. Frida Orupabo is this artist who kind of works with collage, but also video, kind of historical videos that she sourced from historical archives. So this is a baptism. It's a 3-second loop. She never actually ever gets fully submerged, but it was on loop, and all you see is this person about to enter this kind of bath, or entering this bath and about to submerge herself, as in a baptism. So thinking about these ideas of colonialism and baptism, and religion being a kind of ideology, the foundation of laws, and really like the first way of, like, I guess, dominance, of political dominance in some way. This became pertinent. So you enter in a baptism. I also like the idea of you baptizing and then going through. And so through this kind of doorway, you'd walk through and you'd see work by Tenjiwe Niki, which is the painting you see over here, and then this as well. Just to go back, Tenjiwe, sorry, there we go. Tenjiwe works with, this is also a work by her. She works with ideas. This particular series was around gymnasiums. She's looking at gymnasiums as spaces of power, where power plays out. If you think of sport, general sport, but in gymnastics in particular, thinking about judges and people kind of grading people based on their performance, and the performer being this very vulnerable person being watched, having to contort themselves and display this kind of spectacle, and then be graded for that. She started thinking about it as a space for, performing one's identity. The gymnasts are always Black in her paintings, and they became this thing of, like, what does it mean for one to continuously have to perform one's identity? This particular work, which I quite liked, because of the moment, was about tenderness. It was made around this time, this kind of 2020 period, where we couldn't touch and we couldn't really congregate. And so community became this thing that was very important. Again, tying back to the ideas of population and ideologies. She also came across this story from the 1930s of this Danish gym instructor called Niels Book, who came to South Africa and kind of preached or proposed gymnastics as a vehicle for strengthening the white body, to create an Übermensch so that they could dominate the Black natives. So, this Danish instructor had previously sworn allegiance to Hitler. So it was this kind of racial ideology that brought this white supremacy that kind of came in the form of sport. And so gymnastics becomes a very important kind of symbol for exploring these ideas. So that is Tenjiwe. The piece in the center is a continuation of Dineo Bopape's project called Setlhareke Pelo. This little handkerchief here is in kind of reference to Mhlomi, who was known to sport a white handkerchief that he had gotten, while trading on his travels. And so it becomes this kind of symbol for him. The earth is important to Dineo. She's always looking at earth and land as this kind of political and also spiritual, having the spiritual power. She often embeds like herbs that she gets from traditional healers, for instance, those that kind of render the land fertile, fertility herbs, and kind of buries them in the earth. But then also embeds jewels and, kind of stones, things that are kind of activated with particular spiritual significance. There was a ritual that was done around this piece in order to present it. It was done in relation to the river that kind of sits that flows in front of the museum. So there's a physical connection to the land here, and the earth was sourced from a kind of spiritual forest, an ancient forest rather, in France. So there's the significance to every element that is here. Some of the objects were sourced from Lesotho, so Dineo really wanted, and some of the earth, so she really wanted to connect the two spaces in this way. Continues there. The work on the back wall, which I don't think you see very clearly, these kind of black and white photo drawings were by an artist called Zineb Benjeloun from Morocco. Zineb works in kind of animations. She creates these kind of illustrations that are comics. And the reason why I wanted to include Zineb in this particular project was because Angoulême historically apparently used to have many many paper factories, and when those all closed down, they started this comic book, because they had all this paper. They started this comic book festival, and so it's become a kind of tradition there. So it was interesting for me to bring in an artist that works within this form, and she did these political socio-political drawings that relate to the power relationship between Morocco and France, and the complexities of that, the complexity relating to the language. There's some that are written that you can they're in French and you can understand. Some have a partial French section and an Arabic section, and you'd have to know both in order to get the full story. So I quite like this idea of language that she plays with. And then here is work by Frida Orupabo, again, the video artist at the front, and she creates these collages that come from various sources, digital sources, online, including colonial archives. So she'll kind of reclaim often these colonial archives have these photographs of Black people in complicated or compromised kind of power positions, but she always looks for people that are looking back, that have a kind of defiance to this power, this like forced kind of oppression. And so this body of work was particularly important. It was from a series called Hours After, and it was thinking about labor and birth and kind of, people making. And so it doesn't, it ties back to population, obviously, but also power dynamics. Power is at play always, and how one is quite vulnerable in the position of being in medical spaces that don't necessarily treat the Black body well, or give it just give respect. So that was Frida. And then to come back to books, this was a kind of reading room that we put together. These books are a collection of all the available kind of catalogs of printed at Morija printing works from 1901. And my grandfather's book would be part of this series. And then because I wanted to do a publication for the exhibition, I ensured that it was printed at Morija Printing Works. So my publication joins this, which was important to me conceptually for many reasons. What's interesting to see when you look at all of them is they are often, remember that this printing press was started by French missionaries. And so many of the books, even today, read as they look like hymnals, or these kind of, they read the same way as one would, you'd look at these kind of pastel colors, covers, soft kind of covers, and then the kind of texture of the pages is quite similar to the hymn books. And so I thought it was interesting to see how these ideologies translate in various forms. They come up in different ways. And so when so here you see a few more. So I'll come back to the other things that I skipped, but just so you can see. So when I decided to do How to Make a Country, the publication, I wanted to work with Sotho female designer. I worked with Matsidi Sokolove, a good friend and designer based in Cape Town, who is Mosotho, and came up with these, we spoke about it at length, and I wanted to create something that looked like architecture. I wanted architecture to be visible in the book design. And so she created this design which replicates or references Dikdema, which are these designs that you find on the outside of Basotho houses, where you kind of women draw and create these patterns out of kind of cow dung and ochre. So this was an important stylistic choice. And then also to make the kind of, soft palette color, and the cover, the texture of it. It's not, I have the book here so you can see. I don't know if you can see me, but anyway, those were all choices, and they continue. And then the other thing that was included in the publication, it was a publication that obviously showed images of the exhibition, but also showed, there was an essay that I wrote. There was an essay about orthography that was written by Dr. Ditepiso Maglosa, a professor at the National University of Lesotho, who works with linguistics, and kind of looked at the kind of gaps within the Sesotho language, where it's evident that the language was written by perhaps a tongue that didn't quite speak it. The pronunciations, the kind of missing accent and things. It's quite interesting to see. It was always curious. We just have to know that certain words are pronounced a certain way, even though they look exactly the same as other words. So it was an interesting thing to see. And then Dr. Pulu Muji also wrote an essay thinking about nationality and language, and the difficulty of distance and she shares a very personal kind of anecdote about her journey. So that was interesting. And then there was also within the publication contributions from each of the artists that weren't just the works on show. They all contribute to certain things. Dineo Wopape, for instance, was interested in languages that kind of relate to one another. So she looked at words, oceanic words in various languages, various Southern African languages, and how either things were missing or similar, or it's just an interesting thing to see. And then there was also a very important chapter of the publication which I kind of dedicated almost half the book to, is this Lesotho dictionary, which was done by Bare Ineri Literature Collective. Friends of mine who are brilliant and have been running a literature festival in Lesotho, had run a literature festival in Lesotho for many years, but then they had various conversations. I think we also had conversations at some point, but about Lesotho and how perhaps there's a place where it stops, and how we are missing language for articulating the ideas that are being produced by, say, our generation. Even just simple things like curating, or what I do. So they came up with a word making workshop in one of the literature festivals. They invited the general public, and people came and they came up with new terms. And what was interesting about that is, the terms are just, they're really incredible. It's not just about literal things, there's kind of conceptual things happening. So the two words you see here, repolla, is a word that's made up. And it says, which means to challenge power through creative expression. And I loved that idea. It's such a powerful notion. Nalani is obviously part of like the debate of kind of the return of heritage objects, right? It is such a pertinent term in this age. And it means a heritage item that was conquered through conflict or theft, which has become an orphan in foreign lands. So I found that quite beautiful. So we made these two posters, but there are many, many terms in the publication. It also includes words that were written out as a result of them not suiting the kind of Christian ideology, the kind of Christian mission. So words that were related to indigenous practice. So for instance, traditional healing words. So they did an entire kind of section of those words alone that have always existed, but have simply not been written. Then, just to lead you out of the exhibition, this is the way you would exit. This is another video by Frida Orupabo. So as you recall, you'd entered through a baptism, and this you exit through a birth. This was a video of Frida's that was on show in the hours after exhibition, the one with the kind of looking at motherhood and childbirth. And this is really like, this kind of historical sculpture that of a Black woman that has been, and it's kind of superimposed with a video of doctors taking a baby out of a woman. And so, it's a loop. It happens like that. And I like this idea of kind of being birthed outward. So that was How to Make a Country. And that's kind of the main project that I wanted to talk about. But Morija plays a really important role in my work. Morija, as I mentioned, is the space in Lesotho. It's a village that's about 40 minutes away from Maseru. And it is the center of publication. So it's where the printing press, the oldest printing press in the country is. It also houses, it's the Morija Museum and Archives, presently the main and only museum in Lesotho, but it's really more the archive that's important. It was founded again by missionaries who wanted to keep baptismal records somewhere, and came up with Morija Museum and Archives. So I, as a young kind of art practitioner who studied outside of Lesotho, was very drawn to Morija as a space for understanding how to do things. It became the site for whenever I wanted to do a creative project, this is where it began. So these are the projects that I started with. Just to talk about the third Conversations at Morija. So Conversations at Morija is a series that I started doing, a set of conversations. And this is where I kind of curate outside of art curating, where I'm curating conversations with people of significance or relevance in Lesotho and beyond. So this is the third Conversations at Morija, and the reason I start from the latest and work my way back is because it is the one that influenced how to make a country. That directly came from this. It was kind of shortly after Lesotho had its 50 years of independence celebration, and that's when I got to asking myself, what is independence? How does one perform independence? How does a country show it? And that's when I started looking into what makes a country, and this is that, the poster. This was the event. It was this kind of digital and physical project that happened from Maeder House, which is this space. This is the oldest recorded building in Lesotho, and I thought it was important to have it there. So it's hosted in here. It didn't have Wi-Fi at the time of the first Conversations at Morija, which is this, and I got kind of put in for this purpose. I wanted not to host a conversation that people would watch, but that people would take part in. So I invited, it was important to me, this project, because it made me think about many things about curating. The very first Conversations at Morija was done in fulfillment of my master's in curating, and I was required as a practical component to curate an exhibition, and I was like, gosh, how does one curate a show? What do I want to talk about? And I was so interested, I was writing about art and accessibility and inaccessibility. I thought, I always go back to Lesotho. And the truth is, I can't explain what I do or really do what I do in Lesotho without contextualizing it. And so I then thought about it. I was like, I'm going to curate my exhibition in Lesotho, but will people care if I put up artworks on a wall in a space? And I got to thinking, cool, what is curating? It's speaking to an audience. What is my audience? What are they interested in? And I was like, words, language, that's who we are. And we're many things, but words and language are very poignant things. And so I decided to do an exhibition with no art, and instead of art, find people that people would respond to. And I thought about my position as a kind of creative member of Lesotho's diaspora, and I sought others. There were so many incredibly accomplished people, but also people that weren't Basotho that related to Lesotho. So many of these are Basotho. Gojo Bafo, who was the then editor of Black Magazine, I believe. Desmond Dube, an actor. A couple of people. Huma Sekela was not a Mosotho, but through my research and kind of speaking to different people, it was Mfundi Vundla who told me that Hugh is a big Lesothophile, and he introduced me to him, and I was so taken aback when Huma Sekela calls me and he's like, come, let's meet. I hear you're doing a project on Lesotho. And it was just so incredible to hear from him. He was in exile from South Africa and could only perform in South Africa, near South Africa, in Lesotho. So Lesotho became the site of his homecoming concert. The conversation was important. I wanted people to come into the space and feel a sense of ownership and come and engage and not just watch me talk. So I got these computers. I had them sponsored, and it's because I wanted to leave something in the space. And then there was a projection for the general audience to watch, but so you can see what it looked like. You would be invited into the space, and there was a set of instructions so people aren't shy. And then I got people to come in, sit down in front of a computer, one of these, and speak directly to Huma Sekela or whoever the speaker at the time was. So I really liked the idea of that. These are the participants and contributors, which was really wonderful. And so this is the thing. So this is one of the most incredible moments where this villager from Morija came while we were setting up. He's like, what is this? What are you doing? And I explained, and he said, no, we're going to speak. He's like, you're going to speak through this box? And I said, yes. And then he's like, no, I'm going to come back and see. I can't believe that. So he did. And he's speaking to Bojoba, which was incredible. Okay, so I was through the rest without being long-winded. Another important project, this was an important project called Thank You Driver. And Thank You Driver is my first exhibition. So it is when I started thinking about alternative space. Thank You Driver I was part of this Young Curators program after graduating from Rhodes University. I moved to Cape Town, and this Young Curators program was an 18-month traineeship program. And we were all required to curate exhibitions at the end of it, and we could choose exhibition spaces. Some chose, one of the young curators, Nkuli Mlangeni, chose Langa High School as her site. Others chose more kind of traditional exhibition spaces like museums. And I chose the spaces in between because I was, I didn't have a car. I was meandering through the city of Cape Town in minibus taxis. And I found it really interesting, the dynamic in taxis. I found that many people use taxis of all walks of, from various different backgrounds. And so it became this space where we were all kind of engaging with one another. And also when you stop a Cape Town taxi, you say, "Thank you, driver," and then he knows to stop. So it's not short left like here. So that's why I called it Thank You Driver. And the only thing that made you identify the taxi was this. And I liked it because it looks just like the things you put at the back of taxis, these kind of slogans that taxi drivers use. So I wanted it to be relatively invisible. I didn't want it to be like a thing for the art world where people could like book it and then come and see it, which frustrated many Biennale goers. This is where it came from, the idea. And you could just find it at Cape Town Station, just like that. I worked with Pit Stops Taxis, and then I invited different artists to create artworks around taxis or in response to. This was Isa Suarez and the New Teenagers Gospel Choir, and they came up with these songs. And they were like a flash mob. I suppose before flash mobs, you would just get in this taxi and you just catch it normal, you pay the regular whatever, and it goes to Khayelitsha, and then suddenly people start singing, and they're all kind of distributed through the taxi, which is quite cool. This is a piece by Jemus, a Mozambican artist, and it was filmed from outside of Shapa, outside of a taxi in Mozambique, in both windows. So you're kind of strangely hearing the dialogue in the taxi, people gossiping, people on their phone, people hooting, whatever. And you don't understand it because it's in Portuguese, but it's so relatable in a way it just sounds very much like the experience here. So it was an interesting way of combining spaces. This is a piece by James Webb, which was broadcast on the speakers at Langa Taxi Rank. And it said, quite simply, this recording, "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. You're reminded that everything is fine." And so this was like this menacing kind of statement where you didn't know why, what wasn't fine. This was a piece by Edwige Aplogan, where she kind of created this future newspaper based loosely on South Africa, like a total fiction, like the words of names of people, but not real people and not real stories. And it was distributed within this kind of perspex sculpture that she brought, which had a very big perspex penis in the front of it. And it sat straddled between these two seats. And it was interesting because of the dynamic between the taxi driver and the front passenger. It became this awkward thing. The taxi driver didn't love it very much and, kind of threw away the sculpture at some point. This was Nastia Mosquito's taxi, which was entirely like this magical space where he would play the role of a jester. He'd come in and entertain people and play games and things. There were a number. Oh, and the one that's not documented, which I absolutely loved, was by Google Lective. And they did this in-taxi hostess, a hostess she had a till, she had a uniform, and she offered snacks and water, and she'd tell you the duration of the trip to Guguletu and the weather outside. And then instead of, the usual poking the passenger in front of you and giving the money and then getting change from them, she had a till and she would calculate and she'd give you your change. So that was an interesting one. Okay, and then gallery space, curating. This is the last section, curating within gallery space. So I am a director and partner at Stevenson Gallery. I kind of started my role as a young curator who had this curatorial ambition and started working in a commercial gallery. And what does that mean? How do you translate that into the space, right? Largely, we work with artists and exhibitions, and I would call myself more a gallerist than a curator at a gallery. And you are facilitating artist solo exhibitions, sometimes group exhibitions that we put together as a collective of partners. But then, so these are our three spaces, just to tell you. This is Cape Town, our kind of main space, our biggest and oldest space, which was established in 2003. And then this is our Johannesburg space that I'm sitting in right now. In Parktown North, and this is our Amsterdam space, which is our newest baby space. So those are our three gallery spaces. And so this is a project that I curated at Stevenson in Johannesburg a couple of years ago, when we still were in Braamfontein in the city, and it was called Sex. And, you know, I was thinking about the history and politics of sex in South Africa at the time. I think the time of the exhibition, it was like the 10-year anniversary of Zuma's rape trial, and also the first South African porn film, black porn film that got made, Mapuna Volume 1. It was the anniversary of that. You know, there was the murder of a sex worker not too long before that. There were all these like sexual narratives that were emerging. There were various hate crimes that continue till today, you know, kind of sex, corrective rape, etc. And so, yeah, it felt like a pertinent time to explore sex. And so I invited many artists to speak to me about it and have different responses. This was on the outside of the gallery space. This is a piece by Mondiara Nyang, and she was responding to those flyers of like, you know, sex that happened on the walls. And that, you know, that kind of happened throughout the city of Joburg and a number of different things. This is Sabelo Mlangeni, Mshakwalanga, Lady Scully, this is Mitchell Gilbert Messina. This was this kind of like strange fish porn video that Stephen Cohen had done, that we put inside a box, and you'd have to like press your face against the box to see what was going on. And it was interesting how oily this was at the end of the show. So everybody peeped. This is on the kind of top floor of the building, and this is a screening of Mapuna Volume 1. Which, yeah, and then here is a timeline of hate crimes Zanele Moholi had put together and continued. And it's devastating that, you know, it got updated all the time because more people kept getting murdered, more lesbians and kind of the gay community in South Africa, which is really terrible. This was a video by Zanele Moholi looking at this kind of intimate scene between two lesbians, just love, you know, celebrating love and making it visible. Stephen Cohen, this is a kind of a love letter through a glory hole that was passed at Wits University. I didn't even know what a glory hole was at the time, so it was also kind of an education for myself. I worked with, through Simon Gush, SWET, Sex Workers Education Advocacy Task Force, who did these murals on our windows, which overlooked Nelson Mandela Bridge. So they became this like really powerful statement. And it was obviously pertinent in particular at the time because the sex worker had just been murdered. And yeah, we had a couple of talks with them. There was a piece by Faka who did a performance in the space relating to the space called The Factory in the city of Joburg, which is like a gay sex club, which I never heard about. That was a performance on the opening night that is memorable and lives in the memories of those who were there. And that was Sex. There were lots of artists. I can't go through it all, but please look it up if you're interested. So yeah, that's it. And then this is just a quick kind of last exhibition. This was the first exhibition I ever curated in the gallery space called Out of Thin Air, and I was thinking about fantasy spaces. This is a train. I was reading Alain de Botton at the time. He spoke about train and plane dreaming. So I invited 9 artists from Johannesburg to get on a train with me, the Shosholoza Mail, and make our way to Cape Town from Johannesburg. So we all got on a train. It was quite an adventure, and we had cubicles that looked like this, and we'd all congregate within the cubicles and just kind of discuss and figure out what we're going to do. You know, let's exchange texts, exchange things to watch, music, but then also plan our takeover of Cape Town Gallery when we got there, and we did take over. This is a piece by Catherine Dickerson. Fantasy space was interesting to me because, you know, thinking about malls, we'd done this course on fantasy space, spaces that are created to a kind of illusion, you know, illusory spaces. And that was an interesting approach to curating, because essentially curating is that. It's like creating ways for people to navigate through space, really particular ways. So these sculptures would inflate and deflate, and I like that they were there, and then they also weren't. Bad phone photos. Jared Ginsburg, this looked like a pile of sticks, and then through this kind of string across the ceiling, this would turn and it would pull it up and it became a structure. So I love this idea of it disappearing. This is Jamie Gowrie, who was thinking about her stoop, her grandmother's stoop, and she just continuously polished this, and it was the threshold for walking into the gallery space. So people would like mess it up, and then she'd polish it and mess it up and polish it. This is Talia Lubinsky, who's doing a kind of mapping with words, or a pirate radio station done by Malusi Malahlela. Yeah, and this is Nadira Patel, who had this 4-screen video looking at a roller coaster and this idea of obliteration. And that is it. And just to end, I would end on this last slide where I began, a place nobody has heard of, which is Lesotho. Slight joke. Interestingly, when this phrase was heard across the world, I happened to be here. So I was in absolute paradise, exactly where nobody has heard of. And I was so happy that they hadn't.
Hey, thank you so much, Lerato. That was a fascinating tour through your repertoire. Really, thank you so much for sharing your work and talking us through. You know, when I read out the bio, and I'm not familiar with that body of work, so I'm really happy that you were able to kind of take us on that journey. And I also struck by a couple of things. One is, it comes over where you describe your work as storytelling. Mm-hmm. It feels like each exhibition, each project is a story, which I found fascinating. And I was also struck by just how much of the work is driven by ideas about Lesotho and your relationship to it and the relationship of others. So thank you for sharing that. I know there are going to be questions, and there's one in the chat. So I'm just going to read it out. It's from a GSA student, Gregs, who has asked. She said, "Thank you for sharing your work. I really connected with how you spoke about starting projects from home, contextualizing and thinking about your own position as a curator. I also started learning how to work a lot with collage and photography because I love photographs, and I find it so powerful, especially when you think about where in the space each piece is placed. A lot of my own inspiration comes from the village where I grew up, and I often wonder how memory and emotion sit in the way we place things. So my question is, when you're curating, how do you know where something wants to be? Is it a feeling? Is it a memory? Or is it something else that guides you?" What a beautiful question. Yeah. So maybe you can respond to that.
Wow, yeah, it's a really beautiful question. I think it's intuitive, I think. You know, there's so much that you can pre-plan, and we make these diagrams and these exhibition layouts, and it never is that. You know, you'll think about something, you know, even just my office, right? I'll think about okay, these should hang here, and then I'll sit with it for a day and it doesn't feel right, and something just doesn't feel right, something is missing, and so I'll add something and then remove something. And so it is an intuitive game. I think it's also about thinking about how things relate to one another, you know, the conversation between abstraction and figuration, the conversation between certain ideas can often, you know, shout at you. It's like these things need to talk to one another. They want to talk to one another. So I think it's listening to, it's giving yourself time to sit with the work and really look at it and think about what you're looking at. And then, yeah, it kind of comes, you know, you kind of then maybe you know what to do. Not always, but maybe you know what to do to honor the work and honor the kind of conversation that the artist was trying to bring to the fore.
And I see that Bonolo has her hand up and is going to ask a question. So Bonolo, over to you if you want to share your thought or question or comment with Lerato.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much, Lerato, for such an incredible presentation and sharing the work that you do with us. For me, as a Black woman myself, seeing a Black woman in what was predominantly a white space is very inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing with us. I have two questions. The first question is, I've noticed how you collaborate a lot, the role of collaboration in your work, if you could speak to that. And then the second question would be the role of architecture in your work, because I've noticed that architecture is also an important part of what you do, whether it's at the building or the in-between space or the fantasy space. And I think that is very inspiring for me because I'm also interested in curation. So yes, those are my two questions.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think collaboration is important, and you remind me that I neglected to mention my kind of sonic brother, Morena Leraba, who kind of introduced this talk. You're listening to his music at the very beginning of my talk, and I source a lot of inspiration from him and the way he thinks and writes and speaks Sesotho, and it's just very beautiful. So yeah, collaboration is important for me. I find that I'm learning, right? So for me, the only interesting thing about what I do is that I'm able to learn. That's the thing that really drives me. And so it's important to me that I have these dialogues with the creatives that are around in my time. I think it's just such an honor to be able to source from their incredible minds, and through that be able to posit ideas and present them. And so that collaboration is really how I think. I don't know how to process ideas without talking, and you know, maybe I'm just like that. You know, I don't really do them in a vacuum. I tell everyone what I'm doing. I'm like, let's talk about I'm doing this thing, and then from that it influences the project. So that was that's part one. Please remind me part two of your question.
Part two was the role of architecture and space in your work, because it seems like also an important one. My favorite one was the in-between space.
Oh, good. Okay. Interesting that you'd be drawn to the one that isn't actual, like, you know, static architecture. Space has been always interesting to me. You know, part of the conversations that, well, you know, in the first conversations at Morija that I did, right at the beginning of my career, I spoke with an architect who I have great admiration for, Mpeti Morojele. And we were, you know, he raised this idea of having been impacted by the landscape of Lesotho, of growing up in Mokotlo, where, you know, kind of seeing mountainous landscape, and how that translates in his understanding of buildings and space thereafter. And so I've always thought about the impact of sight in one's creative practice, even if I'm not an architect. It's something that's always played a role. In my mind, you see it in my practice, you see it through the Morija and the Lesotho continuous kind of thread. But architecture in kind of in terms of physical space, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, it's a space that houses ideas. And so when one thinks through their ideas, I don't think just about an idea and I can put it anywhere. The space really plays an important role in the development of that idea. What am I doing? You know,
Absolutely.
How do these ideas take up this space? Can they live in this space? Can the space hold them, you know, and nurture them and give them the respect they need? So yeah, it's I'm continuously thinking about space. I don't know if that helps.
No, definitely that answers my question. Thank you. And I also liked what you said about collaboration, because sometimes collaboration can be seen as a negative thing, you know, as if you're collaborating with people, it means you don't know what you're doing. But actually, I don't think that's true. I think collaboration is empowering, you know, especially bringing other young people into the work you do and giving them space. So I think that's incredible. Thank you.
Thank you. And also just to say that, you know, just in terms of my gallerist hat, you know, collaboration is really at the center of it. I learned most of what I know about the art industry from being at Stevenson and being part of a collective, which didn't exist. You know, it was like this model that wasn't there in the art, well, at least in our
exactly,
where like the name on the door shares the power, and so we all have a voice and we're doing this collaboratively. So it means I'm doing an exhibition, but I have 10 other people to ask for an eye, and that's really, really great. I found it very useful. It's a great way of thinking through the world and seeing different vantage points that you might have otherwise missed.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Bonolo, for those nice questions, and Lerato for your insightful responses to them. And I think just to close, I also have a question for you. You know, we have quite a lot of students and also, you know, young architects who I think are really interested in curatorial space. And I know your work bridges more than simply curatorial work. What advice would you give? What guidance would you give to somebody who wants to move into that space? I noticed in a lot of your work, it seemed like you'd initiated your own work. You know, you'd just found a space, but maybe you could just speak to that and just share some of your own experience and maybe offer some thoughts or guidance to somebody that might want to follow your footsteps and move in the direction that you've taken your own career.
Sure. It's always interesting because, you know, when I entered this curatorial space, there weren't very many. I mean, it wasn't like a very defined sector within the arts here yet. You know, we were looking up to Gabby Mwabo, who I continuously look up to. There were a couple, Timbingo Sigoniwe. There were some like African curators that, you know, from the rest of the continent that we were kind of studying in art books, but it wasn't like there were many curators in South Africa, that's for sure. So I was a bit shy to use the term at first, and for a long time, because I was part of this official Young Curators program, for a long time after the program, I still signed the Young Curator. I don't know why I put the young, but it was like I felt like
junior curator.
Yeah, like don't come for me just yet. And then there's a point where I'm like, how exciting to be in a space where it's still malleable and we're still defining this term. And so I think that what I'd encourage any person with curatorial aspirations to do is like take up the space, you know, put the hat on, it's there, you know, grab it, do it. Congratulations, you're a curator. So yeah, and I actually think like it's so inspiring to see how things have shifted since then, you know, since like 2008. There are so many young people that are just out there doing it for themselves. I think with the Instagram kind of generation, the sense of like doing it yourself and seeing more frequently what's happening elsewhere and sourcing inspiration is like, it's tremendous and it's a great resource. So yeah, I think you guys are doing it. I don't know. Yeah.
Hey, wonderful. So Lerato, thank you so much for sharing your work with us and letting us kind of enter your world and getting to know a little bit more about you and what's brought you to the place where you are in your work. We really appreciate it, and looking forward also to your participation in our Architecture Week again this year. We'll be sending you an invitation to see some of the work that we're doing and hear your thoughts and your reflection on it. So thank you very much.
Thank you
very much for
I'm so
joining
looking
us.
forward to it. Thanks everybody for listening and staying online. I know it was long, but thank you.
No, it was beautiful. It was perfect time, and you had a good turnout today to hear you. So thank you.